At first glance, when you read this chapter of One Piece, it seems very simple. I mean, when you see Sanji and Frankie, Usopp, Robin, all of them basically just sitting down, having some ramen, selling some ramen, and then some goons pop up and interrupt them and then taken out, it seems like a standard One Piece chapter. I mean, you have a name drop of the courtesan and all that, and how this person is very, very important and most likely could be someone we know or have heard about, which I'll get into later. Or we have the situation at the end of seeing the shadow form of Orochi. Now, this is what I'm talking about. It seems very simple. It's like, oh, Orochi might be a dragon, and that's pretty much it. But there is a lot going on in this chapter that I think many probably didn't realize. Now, let's get into that. There's going to be a lot of information I want to be discussing, and if I'm not the first person to bring this up, forgive me. I wanted to mention it because I do love mythology. If you've been around for a while, like stuff when it comes to gods, myth, and all of that. I mean, I play a game called Smite, so I know a little bit of information about gods and stuff since I, really love that MOBA. But let's get into the main topic at hand, Orochi. So, Orochi, which is the Shogun of Wano. Ever since the beginning of, this arc, or when we heard about, Orochi, many have been under the speculation that, Orochi could either be very strong or very weak. He might be a pushover because since this is an arc affiliated with Kaido, most likely Orochi might just be a pushover, a guy behind the scenes, a man behind the curtain, and he's not really that strong at all. It's mainly Kaido pulling the strings. Many has assumed that Orochi wouldn't be anything at all. And at the end of this chapter, seeing the shadowy form of Orochi with the dragon heads, it's clear as day that at the very least Oda wants us to believe that Orochi isn't weak by any means. He probably is not a weakling that can be just thrown to the side, unless it's typical Oda trolling. Now, the reason why I'm getting into gods and myth and stuff, if you were unaware, Orochi is actually a name of a famous myth or god in Japanese culture. Now, the reason how I know about Orochi is because I watched an anime a very long time ago called Laughing Under the Clouds, which I'll have a picture of it on the screen here. It's a really good anime. It's not the best I've ever seen, but it's a really enjoyable series, and it has, the main character, one of the main characters basically having Orochi embedded in their body. They're basically a vessel holding back this demonic creature, this god, which is Orochi, this 8-headed serpent, or aka dragon, in Japanese myth. And that's where I found out about Orochi, and then after, Susanoo came out in Smite and stuff, I found out a little bit more about the lore of Orochi, and to explain that to get everybody up to speed and why it's relevant to this chapter, Orochi in Japanese myth was a creature with 8 heads. It was a serpent/dragon, and Susanoo, which you most likely recognize that name, and probably Amaterasu as well, their brother and sister, Susanoo was cast down from the heavens, and he was basically exiled. And one day, he actually managed to take down, the serpent, which was Orochi. After taking down the serpent, he found a legendary weapon that was basically a god weapon embedded into the serpent's hide, and he brought it back to the heavens where Amaterasu was. He gave it to his sister, and then he was allowed back into heaven. So he was back in good graces once again. Now, what makes this very relevant is that Orochi's entire personality, at least described in the myths, is Orochi was defeated thanks to alcohol. Being drunk. And I highly doubt Orochi's going to have the same character trait as Kaido, because Kaido, obviously, we've already seen his personality and how he acts, so I highly doubt Oda is going to, use that fact of Orochi on to him once again. Use that, trait that Kaido has on Orochi, even though it is in Orochi's myth. But even then, though, it is interesting that there is some similarities to Orochi's myth and now Orochi, but also Kaido when you, put these together. And I feel like Orochi's myth might have been separated onto Kaido and Orochi himself, the Shogun. Now, let's get into that. Now, if you didn't, take a quick interest in what I said about the history of Orochi and, Japanese myth, when Susanoo was taking down that 8-headed serpent, he found a legendary sword. Now, let's back up for a second. Let's think about the lore of One Piece in general. One Piece, we know about legendary swords. There's a lot of legendary swords, and we know majority of these swords basically come from Wano. It's obvious. I mean, this is a type of, country that builds poneglyphs. They were responsible for it. So we know that this country is very skilled. And, these legendary swords popping up makes complete sense from, these craftsmen that we've seen already in Wano. And we know that Luffy is potentially holding a legendary sword that Zoro is very interested in. For what we know, what if Luffy's sword that he's been carrying around is the sword in the myth, Orochi's myth that Susanoo found and gave to his sister Amaterasu? Now that would be really cool. But here's another thing I do want to point out as well. If we go on the lines of the myth and the swords and stuff, legendary weapons, maybe the reason why the swords were created in the first place, not just because they're awesome and all that, and there was a person that really loved swords, but it was because maybe they built those swords to probably take down Kaido, if he has been around that long. We don't know how long Kaido's been around. For all we know, he could be a very ancient creature, but we can at the very least say that maybe the swords in some way might have been built to fight him, which aka could be potentially a god. Think about it. Now, the point I'm trying to say, though, about Orochi is that if we could assume what he looks like, he probably looks like the 8-headed serpent / dragon, because we do see about 5 to 6 heads at the end that's just blacked out like they're a silhouette, but we don't really get to see anything else. But we could pretty much assume that by just the final page alone. So, yeah, I think where Oda's going with this is pretty interesting. I am looking forward to seeing how Orochi's character is going to be displayed. Is he going to be a joke? Is he going to be serious? I mean, we do know that, people have called him a coward. We've even seen it. I mean, we have seen that, he's afraid of, the actual samurai popping back up again and fighting. We know he's afraid, but at the same time, though, if we have seen his true form, it really makes you wonder, why is he so afraid? Is it because of the swords? Is it because the samurai really are that strong? Who really knows? But we'll find out, when we finally get there. Now, getting into the other content of this chapter, there's one quick little funny moment I think many are kind of overlook, and that is Frankie eating ramen with his tiny hands. Look at this panel real quick. Frankie is eating ramen with little tiny hands coming out of his big hands, and he's just sitting there slurping up. That's hilarious. I love that. It's so... I love Frankie. I missed him so much. I missed my boy Frankie. I know many might not like Frankie as much as I do, and I personally prefer Brook out of all the Straw Hats. I still love Frankie. I love his super and all that. It's great. But seeing my boy Frankie eating ramen with his tiny hands, it won me over. It won me over for this chapter. Now, speaking of which, we got to see our group of characters that we haven't seen in a while actually just having fun, chilling, doing normal Straw Hat antics, and that makes me happy. I am pleased because of that. It's been years since we've seen Usopp, Robin, Frankie, and Sanji, and all of them just sit down, have some food together, having some fun. It was a great experience, and just seeing how, once again, we get to see another element to Sanji's character once again in this chapter, that also made me happy. Let's get into that. So, these group of goons that popped up try to interrupt Sanji's stall. They're like, hey, you're not allowed to have a business here and all that, set up a stand or whatever, because, you need to go through us, we can offer you protection or money. And, Sanji's like, oh, I don't need that and all that, I'm strong enough to protect myself. Obviously, it led into a fight, and they, ruined Sanji's, food and all that, spilt it on the ground. And as we know with Sanji's entire character, it's been established since the very beginning, if you spill his food, you better eat that. No wasting food. You better not waste food in his presence, even if it's on the ground. But obviously they didn't care, and he shoved it down their throat, which is just like, oh my god. Like, I missed seeing that with Sanji. It's been a long time since we saw Sanji act like that. I know we got to see a little bit of his character once again that we haven't seen for a long time in the whole Cake Island arc, with how he didn't want the cake poisoned when, Capone was trying to poison it. But it's just really nice to see the man forcing someone to eat the food that they messed up, because that's just been his character since the very beginning, what he learned from Owner Zeph. But, okay, so with all of that out of the way, what else is there to talk about? I guess, let's talk about the courtesan. So, the courtesan, there's many speculations, most likely, in the community who potentially this person could be, and I've been weighing my options on who the courtesan could be. It's a very beautiful individual, and I feel like everybody's going to kind of come to the same conclusion. There's probably 3 individuals that this can most likely be. Number 1, you could assume it might be Stussy, because remember, she was like the queen of the pleasure district or whatever, so we could assume that Stussy I think she might be at the Reverie, though, so for all we know, she actually might not be here, so that could probably be counted out, but we do know that she was like the queen of the, the pleasure district, so for all we know, that could be her, but once again, probably big doubt. And then the second person could be Boa, and the reason why it could be Boa is because we haven't really seen her in a long time, but everybody's just falling down with hearts in their eyes because, this person's drop dead gorgeous. So, for all we know, it could be Boa. And it would be very interesting if she arrived in this arc, since it's already crazy, and seeing how she would interact with Luffy. Now, if it's not Boa, another person it could be, and it's the most likely outcome, would be Momo's little sister. Let's think about that one. Obviously, a few chapters back, Oda went out of his way to introduce Momo's sister. Okay. And for him to do something like that, it means Momo's sister is going to be relevant. And as I said, I highly doubt the mother, sending everybody back, or forward into time 20 years, wouldn't try to save her own daughter. I just truly doubt that. So the big point I'm getting at is most likely the daughter had another role to play in the story, and since if we assume she didn't get killed and she got to survive, that means 20 plus years have passed, and most likely she is an adult now. And you would put that age around the same age around where we see the girl in this chapter. The courtesan that's just walking through the street and all that Orochi's interested in. It would make for a very tragic princess story. And I could definitely see that being a thing. I could definitely see that is where the story is going and what Oda's doing with this girl that was introduced. It could be potentially Momo's sister. So, yeah, that's pretty much about it when it comes to this chapter. It's a simple chapter, like I said, but there is some stuff going on behind the scenes with Orochi and all that. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe. If you like this video, please leave a like. And I love you guys. Please be safe. Chibi out.